Well, I'm Rob Dawson, joined this week by our Liverpool correspondent, Beth Lindop. Thanks for stepping in this week, Beth. We're going to start in Manchester, obviously, after the Manchester derby, where Ruben Amorim held a heated press conference after the 3-0 defeat to Man City.
Guys, you have I understand that, and I accept. So it's not a record that you should have in Manchester United. There are a lot of things that you have no idea what happened during these months, but I accept that. But I'm not going to change. When I want to change my philosophy, I will change. If not, you have to change the man. So, and we will talk about that every game that we lose. I don't believe in that, in the system or whatever. I play my way, and I'm going to play my will until I want to change. My message is that I'm going to give everything. I will do everything, always thinking about what is best for the club. That was always the same message. And then it's not my decision, the rest. So until I'm here, I will do my best I really want to win games. So I'm suffering more than them. I'm trying to be rational, and I don't lie to myself. So I see the record, I understand the frustration of everybody, and I understand any decision that came with that. But that conversation about the two midfielders, the pair, Kobe and Mino, I understand all these narratives. But then when I look certain games, we play with two. It's the same thing.
Rob, you were obviously there yesterday, and you've been there most of the season, most of last season through Ruben Amorim's press conferences. I mean, he looked there like a frustrated man. Was that a sort of a typical sort of Amorim press conference, or was there a sense yesterday that the heat was really starting to mount?
Yeah, I mean, the clips that have been played there, you can obviously tell that he's very frustrated. I mean, I actually sat in the room, I actually thought he was a little bit more measured than probably I was expecting when he actually walked in. We've seen him do things like this in the past. He was really frustrated after the Arsenal game. I think he thought that United played quite well in that game, but all the questions afterwards were about the goalkeepers and the goalkeeper situation. He got very, very frustrated, probably more frustrated there than he was in that press conference after the City result. Obviously, you saw as well how emotional he was in his post-match stuff after the Grimsby defeat. Kind of came out after that and said, I do get emotional when these things happen, and I just need 10 minutes to kind of calm down, and then I'm fine. So I actually thought, as frustrated as he obviously is at that result, and you can kind of tell there in the press conference, I actually thought he was relatively measured. I think part of his frustration is that immediately now after any Man United defeat, the questions are about his system. I think all of those are valid because, it's not really worked out than perhaps in the way that he would expect. But his point to us in that press conference yesterday was, well, you're talking about the system now. You weren't talking about the system after the Arsenal defeat because I assume that you all thought it worked relatively well. And again, there were questions yesterday about Bruno Fernandes. Is he better suited as a number 6 or as a number 10? He played as a number 6 yesterday, but he also did that job against Arsenal, against Declan Rice, Zubimendi and Odegaard, and did okay. So Amorim's kind of pointing out that you can't have it both ways. You can't think that it's okay after the Arsenal game and blame a City defeat on the system. It's, these things are the same. There are different reasons for these defeats. And I think the overall thing with this is that he's just becoming more and more frustrated. And ultimately, he's becoming more and more frustrated because of his record. You can't, for all the kind of defence that you can mount of the system and the players, you can't get away from his record. I mean, 8 wins in 31 Premier League games is just not good enough. And I'm sure that, maybe you from the outside can tell that, things just aren't going the way that he would have expected when he first came in.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously been a lot of debate, hasn't there, about his approach in terms of his honesty and how sort of blunt and emotional he's maybe been at times. And he's had a lot of criticism for that. And I think, from the outside looking in, I don't mind that from a manager. I think it's quite nice. We talk a lot now about how sort of sanitized the game is. And I think, we all know that there's been big problems at Manchester United long before, Ruben Amorim came in. So, I think that there's nothing wrong with him, I guess, venting his frustrations, but it does seem sort of the past few weeks, certainly after that Grimsby game, it was almost like he maybe should have taken 5-10 minutes to just sort of calm down and get his thoughts together before coming in, because ultimately, he can't be coming in giving these super emotional reactions after every game. That won't inspire the players, that won't inspire the fans. But it does sort of feel like, I mean, obviously he was one of the managers that was in the frame when Jurgen Klopp left Liverpool. He was someone that Liverpool were interested in, and ultimately the reason that Liverpool didn't go for him in the end was because he was so wedded to his philosophy, as he calls it, or his formation. I mean, do you think the fact that he is being so obstinate and he's really sort of sticking to his guns, is that admirable, or is it a little bit naive?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think that it's gone past the point of no return with the system. I think if he was going to change his system, that he probably would have done it at points last season when, they really were struggling. I think he's got to the point now where he probably feels that if he was to change now, it would be quite a big sign of weakness, both with the fans and also the players, that he's been so defensive of the system, and he's explained why he's doing it, that to change now, the immediate question, if he was to change for the next game, would be, well, why have you not done this sooner? And I think he's trying to avoid that. He has got a point in that everyone knew that he played this system at Sporting Lisbon. It's no surprise that he's come here and played this system. The guys that hired him at Man United knew exactly what he was going to do and what he wanted to do, and they hired him regardless. I mean, I think the more pertinent question is, has he got the players to play with this system? I would suggest that he hasn't, even after the summer window. In my mind, I can understand why they spent a lot of money to revamp the attack, because they just didn't score enough goals last year. In my mind, I would have perhaps used a little bit of money that they used on one of those attackers to buy a midfielder, because I think having a midfielder who can cover a lot of ground, who is energetic and mobile, is far more important to that system than maybe having another number 10 or maybe the money that was spent on a goalkeeper. So he's just not going to change his system. So I can understand why the conversation is going to carry on, but he's just not going to change. And I think the problem he's got now, and again, going back to that first answer that I gave, is his record. And regardless of systems and personnel, it's 8 wins in 31 Premier League games. I went back and looked at some of the other permanent managers, their records in the last 31 games. Erik ten Hag had 12 wins in his last 31 games in charge. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer had 14 wins in his last 31 games in charge. That tells you that Ruben Amorim now is on relatively thin ice. And I remember at the end of last season, there was someone who was very well connected to the kind of top bosses at United, who said that this was before the Europa League final, said that there was no danger that Ruben Amorim was going to get sacked after the Europa League final, even if they lost against Tottenham, which obviously they did. But what he said was, you need to look at the first 5 games of next season. Well, the 5th league game of this season is against Chelsea at Old Trafford next Saturday. At the moment, they've got 1 win from 4. It hasn't been particularly convincing. That tells you that the pressure really is on Ruben Amorim now. And I'm convinced that United don't want to make a change, particularly this early. The danger is, has there been enough sign of progress or improvement, ever since he came in last November? Has there been enough there to justify him carrying on? And at the moment, the difficulty he's got is that he's now living game by game. They've got Chelsea at home, then they've got Brentford away, then they've got Sunderland at home before the international break. He really is in dangerous territory now, because it's just, aside from the conversation about the system and players and who's he's picked and who's he signed and where the money gone, the biggest thing that you just cannot get away from, and he accepted it yesterday in his press conference, is his record. You just can't get away from that record of 8 wins in 31 Premier League games. And Beth, you cover another big club in Liverpool. I imagine that if Arne Slot had come in and replaced Jurgen Klopp and had that kind of record, you would probably think that he'd be quite lucky to be there still.
Yeah, I think certainly maybe what has helped Amorim is that Arne Slot inherited a stable club, I guess, and United aren't that and haven't been that for some time. So I think if Arne Slot had come in and that had been his kind of record, and particularly following on from a manager as successful as Jurgen Klopp, the fans maybe would have started to grow frustrated quite quickly. I think United fans, to give them credit, are quite understanding of the situation at the club. They know that the issues around the club aren't solely on the manager, it's about the players. Some of these players have been there through several managers' tenures and maybe have been guilty at times of not quite doing enough to sort of save the manager's job. I think, the one thing that last season it felt like was a mitigating factor from Amorim. I mean, you mentioned that does he have the right players? And he obviously inherited a squad that wasn't his last season. Now he's spent obviously this money. United have spent this money in the summer, and you said about them getting another midfielder. How much of that is down? How much of that recruitment is down to him and his decisions, or how much of that is sort of above his head in terms of, you know, the likes of Dan Ashworth, the people making those decisions sort of behind the scenes?
I mean that I do have a lot of sympathy with Amorim, because he's, again, in his pre-match press conference before the City game, he's asked a lot about Benjamin Sesko, and the question is framed as in, you know, you've spent a lot of money to bring this guy in. Well, you know, it's not necessarily his choice. United went through a lot of different options with the number 9. They looked at Liam Delap, they looked at Gyökeres a little bit. There was all these different kind of names, and to kind of pin Sesko on Amorim, and any of these signings really on Amorim, it isn't right really, because there is you mentioned there is a committee that kind of decide these signings. Amorim has a say, obviously, but there's also Omar Barada, there's Jason Wilcox, there's Christopher Vavell, who are all involved in this recruitment process. So to kind of pin the summer spend just on Amorim, it is wrong, and it's part of. I mean, I do want to kind of defend Amorim a little bit, because again, you can't pin all the kind of recruitment on him. I don't think you can pin all the blame for what's happening at Man United on him either. I mean, he's not the type of manager to kind of come into a news conference and throw his players under the bus. Not at all. I mean, he's actually said that on Friday at Carrington. He said that he's always going to tell us in the media that he loves his players, whether he thinks he loves them or not. You've got a situation against City where immediately, again, the questions are about Amorim, about the system. Well, if you look at those 3 goals, all 3 of those goals that City scored are completely avoidable. Now, Jeremy Doku was walked past Luke Shaw for the first goal. Luke Shaw is United's most experienced, longest-serving player. He should know better than that. The second goal comes from a throw-in, a standard throw-in on City's left. And instead of United forcing the ball back into City's defence and making them recycle it and start again, they kind of just cut through United with 2 or 3 passes, and all of a sudden Haaland's in and he scores. The third goal is an absolute abomination, really, defensively, and it could have been 4 or 5. So Amorim's probably sat there thinking, well, why am I getting all this stick? And the problem is that Amorim, as a manager of Man United, and also his system, because he comes in and plays a different system, is now a lightning rod for criticism, and people kind of tend to look past the other things that are contributing to this. All that said, I mean, and he said it before. He said it after Grimsby. He said that, you know, clubs can't change 22 players. If there's a change to be made, it is the manager, and that is true. You know, if there is one major change to be made at Man United because of results, it's going to be Ruben Amorim losing his job. It's not going to be the club saying, right, we're going to stick with Ruben and we're going to change 22 players. So as much as I can sit here and defend him, he is the man who's kind of taken that on. And the worry is that he's going to struggle to turn it around from this point. You know, when you go through a run of 8 wins in 31, you know, that is a million miles away from where United need to be. And do United, as much progress or, you know, positivity as there has been after kind of the Arsenal game and bits of the games at the start of the season, is there enough there to suggest that United are capable of winning 10 games, 5 games on the bounce? You know, probably not. And it's a difficult place for a manager at a top club. That's a difficult place for them to come back from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned Dan Ashworth there. I completely forgot he's not even at the club anymore, which I suppose.
Yeah, but he was part of it. He was part of it, you know, 2 summers ago. So it's, you know, it is part of, you know, the wider kind of recruitment issues at United. You know, that's been an issue for 10 years. Have United used their money and signed the right players? You know, invariably, the answer is no. There just haven't been that many successes over the last 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose on the flip side, a team that have been pretty successful when it comes to recruitment over the past sort of decade or so is Manchester City. Obviously hasn't been maybe quite the start to the season that they would have liked, but yesterday, particularly in that second half, thought they were really impressive. I caught a little bit of it while I was at Burnley, and you know, you mentioned that third goal, and Manchester United were really poor. But how much of that and how much of that result yesterday was down to City just being really good?
Yeah, I was impressed with City. I mean, I think part of the frustration for United is that City heading into the game looked quite vulnerable after those defeats. But they didn't really look like that during the game, particularly sort of in that middle period of the game, the end of the first half, start of the second half. They looked, I don't want to say the old City because that's just daft, but they looked more like the team that we're used to. Thought it's massive for City if they can get Phil Foden back. Obviously last season, lots of the problems that City had were put down to missing Rodri, but they also missed Phil Foden, not to a season-ending knee injury, but his form dipped. There were other things going on off the pitch. He looked exhausted for most of the season. He said when we were with them in America for the Club World Cup, he thought that the rest in June, that he didn't go with England in June, and he thought that the rest that he had there had done him the world of good. He actually said it was going to be new season, new me. And if City can get him back to his level from 23, 24, that season when he was the Premier League's best player by a mile and had I think he had 19 league goals and 27 in all competitions. If City can get him back, that is an absolutely massive boost to Pep Guardiola, because you're always going to have someone like Erling Haaland scoring. In his worst season, Erling Haaland is always going to score goals. We showed that again against United. If you can have Phil Foden coming back to that form that he showed 2 years ago, plus with Rodri coming back, maybe with a bit of a more stable defence, you get John Stones back next to Ruben Diaz. I actually thought that Donnarumma was terrific yesterday. Obviously he's not Edison in terms of what he can do with the ball at his feet, but he's capable. And what he does bring is this huge presence in goal that everyone will have seen the save that he made from Mbeumo on that volley. It's a terrific save. But there was a point in the first half where United had a run of corners and there was a little bit of pressure building, and United it's kind of sensed that United thought that maybe something was happening. Corner comes in the box and Donnarumma comes through a crowd of players and punches the ball an absolute mile. And it relieves the pressure. It makes all City fans relax, the City players relax. So I thought I was really impressed with him. And, do I think that they're on the same level as maybe Liverpool and Arsenal? Perhaps not, but they are still quite a dangerous team in this title race, particularly if they're kind of going under the radar a little bit. And I thought they showed yesterday just how good they can be when everything starts to click.
Yeah, just on Donnarumma, because from the outside looking in, it was sort of, it seemed a little bit of a strange signing. Obviously, they sort of went for James Trafford in the end, obviously bringing him back to the club, and he didn't play particularly well. Was it Tottenham that he made that blunder against, and you felt a little bit sorry for him, because it almost feels like he's made that mistake, and now he's facing a very real fight to stay in the team. How do you see that one panning out going forward? Is Donnarumma now sort of the undisputed number one, or is there still a way back for Trafford to get that shirt back?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Pep picking Donnarumma yesterday was quite a big statement, because he could have quite easily just said, well, Donnarumma's not up to speed yet, we're going to stick with James Trafford. He played the other Premier League games, but to throw him straight in suggests that he is going to be number one. I mean, Pep in his press conference on Friday did sort of say, we've got a lot of games, the players don't believe that I'm going to chop and change and make changes to the team, but I will. And that suggests that James Trafford will get games. It perhaps won't be the number of games that he thought. I do feel quite sorry for James Trafford, because obviously he turned down that move to Newcastle. He's come to City. I think when he arrived, he was probably looking at it and thinking, well, Edison's got 1 year left on his contract. He said that he's staying for this season, so maybe I'm number two, or we share the responsibility of this season, and then Edison leaves on a free next summer and I'm then number one. Well, now Edison's gone and he's got a 26-year-old Donnarumma in front of him who's just signed a 5-year contract with the option of another year. So James Trafford probably looks at that situation and think, well, this isn't really what I signed up for. And he's got, motivation really to play as many games as possible, because he wants to be in the World Cup squad in the US next summer. So I do feel a little bit sorry for James Trafford. I think what Pep Guardiola will say, if he's being completely honest, is that the needs and the desires of players is secondary to what the club and what City need. And he kind of hinted on Friday that they did think Edison was going to stay. Edison then has gone to Fenerbahce, and what he called it a market opportunity with Donnarumma. You don't get these opportunities to sign world class players that often. And while it might be disappointing to James Trafford, for Pep Guardiola, City is the most important thing, and they had a chance to sign a world class player in his position, and they went ahead and did it because he wants the team to be successful. So, I mean, Pep will never say this, but in his head, he's probably thinking, well, if James Trafford's a little bit annoyed, that's up to you. It's not really my problem. My job is to help City win. Well, next we're heading to Merseyside. Beth, you were at Turf Moor on Sunday. It was another win for Liverpool, but another late win. Are you seeing that as a sign of champions, or are you slightly more concerned that they're not getting the job done early?
I'm seeing it as a sign that I'd like them to score a bit earlier, so my match, all my work could be done a little bit earlier. But funnily enough, Arne Slot was actually asked that question in the press conference afterwards, and he said a bit of both. And I think that probably is the the right answer. I think, the old adage is that champions always find a way. And that is what Liverpool have done so far this season. Even when they've not been playing well, they've managed to find a way, however improbably, to win games and to win games against really tough opposition as well. The first game was at home to Bournemouth, who I think they're in fourth at the moment, have started the season really, really well. Then they were away to Newcastle United, which is always a tough place to go. And obviously with the wider context of everything around Alexander Isak, made that even more difficult. And then Arsenal as well. Burnley, obviously maybe a team that you would expect them to beat, a little bit easier. But I think, even going back, I remember, I think when City won the title in 2018-19, they won that game 1-0 thanks to a goal from Aguero. So quite often those games prove quite tricky for the top teams, because Burnley, they're not afraid to just sit back and defend as much as possible. And they defended admirably yesterday, I thought. So yeah, I think that there's encouraging signs to take from the fact that they've not been at the best, and yet they've been able to go on and win these games, and to be top of the table after 4 games is really impressive. However, it isn't sustainable to win games like that for the entire season. I hope that's not what happens anyway, because I'm not sure that my heart rate could take it. But yeah, I think that there are concerns. I think certainly in the first 2 games, they looked defensively like there were some vulnerabilities there. I think they tightened up a little bit defensively. Against Arsenal, they were, they did well at limiting Arsenal to very few clear chances, but the flip side of that was that creatively they looked to be lacking a little bit of a spark, and that was sort of the same against Burnley yesterday. So they're still far from being the complete package, but I think when you consider it's still so early on in the season, they're still yet to blood the British record signing, that there are a lot of positive signs. And I think the fact that they are, they're not afraid to play right till the final whistle and dig as deep as they have been digging is a positive, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like that maybe Liverpool haven't been given the credit that they deserve for their start of the season, because I appreciate that when you win games so late that's going to be immediately what you go to. They're only scoring it's taking them time to break teams down, but they've won away at Newcastle, they've beaten Arsenal at home. They're 2 massive games in terms of, I know it's too early to talk about title race and things, but massive games in terms of the season. Obviously, Sunday at Turf Moor, it was Mo Salah who got the winner. I think it's fair to say that he's been relatively quiet at the start of this season, perhaps not delivering what he did for Liverpool last season. Where do you sit on that debate? Do you care that he's not getting as involved if he's popping up with the winning goal, albeit with a penalty?
Yeah, I mean, I think last season he was just absolutely outstanding. Obviously he scored more goals in his first season at the club, but I think in terms of his overall game and his passing and his ability to bring his teammates into the game, I think last season was probably his most impressive season in a Liverpool shirt. So I think anything short of that, there would be criticism, and particularly when you consider, he's just signed a bumper new 2-year contract. So yeah, you can't argue with the fact that he's been quiet. Yesterday he did very, very little, but then again, he goes and he manages to score the winning goal. And, I turned to someone next to me when he stepped up to take that penalty, and I said I'd have given it to Dominic Szoboszlai to take, because his last 2 penalties were, they were both in friendlies, but he missed both of them. So, I think the fact that he was able to, after having quite a difficult afternoon, to be able to sort of blank out all of that noise and just put it away as well as he did, just shows the mentality that he has. And ultimately that's why Arne Slot leaves him on the pitch. Again, that was something else that Slot got asked about yesterday. Do you ever consider taking Mo Salah off in games when he's not being effective? And he said, maybe sometimes I will do that. But the message from him was very much, as long as he's on the pitch, he's always got a chance of doing something, whether it be from the penalty spot, whether it be setting up a teammate, whether it be scoring the winning goal himself. I think he's just such a talismanic player for Liverpool. And I think, we've seen him have dips in form before. Even last season, he had a little spell at one point where he wasn't quite at his best. I think you still can tell very much that he's trying to get to grips with his new teammates. I think, that chemistry that he had with Sadio Mane and Roberto Firmino was incredible, and it's quite rare to get that level of chemistry, consistently in the way that those 3 did. And I think, even with Darwin Núñez, who's obviously gone to Saudi Arabia now, I think despite the fact that he was was unreliable in front of goal. Him and Mo Salah actually had a really good relationship. So I think he's now trying to get to grips with all of these new players. And I think as well, one thing that I feel with Mo Salah this season, I think out of all of the Liverpool squad, the difficult circumstances over the summer, obviously with losing Diogo Jota, I think that's maybe affected him more than a lot of players. He said it in the aftermath of that he was scared of coming back to Liverpool. He never thought he'd be scared of coming back to Liverpool, and he was. And, we saw him have that really emotional moment at the end of the Bournemouth game where he just stood and cried essentially in front of the fans. And I do think that has maybe weighed quite heavily on him. And, he feels maybe as one of the senior players in the group that it's maybe on him to be a real sort of pillar of strength for that squad. And I do think that has taken its toll a little bit. But yeah, I'm not overly concerned. I think, we've seen enough to suggest that, he's still capable of doing brilliant things. I think in pre-season he looked very, very sharp actually. So I think maybe it's just a case of he's finding his feet and gelling with his new teammates a little bit.
Another player that there have been questions about is Florian Wirtz. I mean, are we just looking at a young player coming to terms with the pace and the physicality of the Premier League, or is there a bigger problem there, do you think?
Well, I think, when you sign a player for upwards of £100 million, you expect them, regardless of their age, regardless of all of those things that you said, and the fact that, they're bedding into a new league, you expect them to come in and be have that wow factor immediately. And he probably hasn't had that. He's come in and probably Hugo Ekitike, who was almost, I think in some conversations has been a bit of an afterthought because of all of the stuff about Alexander Isak. But actually he's come in and done incredibly well. He scored 3 goals in his first 3 games. And I think in a way that hasn't grabbed the headlines in quite the same way. I am not overly concerned. I think, you look at what he's done so far, you look at the way that people talk about him and the way that, obviously he had 3 clubs desperate to sign him, probably more than that, but obviously Manchester City, Bayern and Liverpool were the 3 sort of main clubs in the picture. And I think, the history dictates that at some point he's really going to turn it on. And I think, it's about for him. He said himself during the international break, the Premier League is very different to the Bundesliga. He's still adapting to that level, to the demands, to the physicality. I thought actually in the second half against Arsenal, he was really, really good. I thought in the second half yesterday, you saw him become more influential as the game wore on. And I also think, Liverpool's midfield hasn't necessarily been particularly settled at the start of this season. Ryan Gravenberch was out for the first game. He was suspended. Alexis McAllister's been in and out. Dominic Szoboszlai has been going to right back. So I think, Liverpool haven't had a real sort of settled front sort of 6, I guess, over the first few games of the season. And I think maybe, again, once he's able to sort of consistently get a run alongside a group of players who he can sort of find a level and a connection with, that's when we might start to see the best of him.
And then another new signing in Alexander Isak. Obviously, we didn't see him at Burnley on Sunday. I've seen Arne Slot sort of talk about how they're going to try and ease him in. And what do you think the plan is for Isak? Obviously, Liverpool's schedule is quite hectic now going forward. When do you think we'll see him, and what do you think Slot has in mind for him as he kind of tries to bed him in?
Yeah, well, Slot spoke at length on Sunday about his plan for him. I think, there was obviously a lot of disappointment amongst fans and online that Isak wasn't involved at all. I think a lot of people expected him to be on the bench. And, there's an argument that having him there, certainly in a game like yesterday where Liverpool obviously needed a goal late on, it would have been nice to have him as an option to bring on. But Arne Slot's point is that, he signed a 6-year contract. He's here for 6 years. I mean, whether he fulfills those full 6 years, only time will tell. But, he's here for the long term. He's not here to be rushed into 3 fixtures in the space of a week. And Arne Slot said, yes, on Sunday that, he's far away from being able to play 3 games a week, which is obviously the schedule that Liverpool have got at the moment. He said, he could have put him on the bench on Sunday. He could have brought him on for 10, 15 minutes at the end, but he feels like that's maybe not the best way to build him up. He feels like the best way is to allow him to train, and then he can maybe play a more sort of consistent, solid spell. He mentioned sort of he might be able to play 45 minutes against Atletico Madrid. So I would be surprised if he's not involved at all on Wednesday. That said, he said if he plays 45 minutes against Atletico Madrid, don't expect him to play 45 minutes against Everton on Saturday because his body's not ready for that yet. So I think Slot is very much being guided by, how fit he is, how his body is. I think the last thing that he wants, the last thing that Liverpool want is for Isak to be rushed in, and then he's out for 6 weeks with an injury that he picks up. So I think it's all about trying to manage his workload. But yeah, I imagine against Madrid on Wednesday is when we might see the first glimpse of him in a Liverpool shirt.
Well, next we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about the return of the Champions League. Well, the Champions League is back this week, and ESPN's Ryan O'Halloran has once again ranked the 36 teams in the competition. Here he is to explain just how he does it and who he's tipping for Champions League glory this season.
Yeah, so every year for the past 4 years, I've taken on the impossible task of ranking every team that's in the Champions League group stages, or what we now know as the league phase. And I do that by watching every game in the Kazakhstan Premier League, every game in the Cypriot Premier League. I'm kidding. I don't do that. I use the betting odds as a general guideline for where to sort of tier out each team's. The betting odds are not good to make money off of, but they're a good way to actually project what's going to happen. So I start there. Then I look at the transfer market values of each team just to get a general sense of the talent level of everyone. And then after that, I use something called the club ELO ratings, which comes from chess. Essentially, each game a team plays, they get awarded points or subtracted points based on how much they win by, who they're playing, where the game is, and it just gets updated and updated over time. So they have a long track record going back basically since club soccer ever started. And it's nice because it's purely results based, and it takes into account league difficulty, opponent difficulty, and all of that stuff. And then after that, I just pick based on what rankings I think will make fans the most mad. It's interesting. I expected PSG to be clear favorites to win the Champions League this year, given that they beat Liverpool, beat Arsenal last year, and then famously won 5-0 in the final against Inter Milan. But they're actually sort of like a joint favorite with Liverpool, Barcelona, and Arsenal. In some places, betting odds have them as the fourth favorite. But to me, they should be number one, just because, one, we've seen them do it. Two, it's a young team with a lot of the players who have already done it, potentially getting even better. And then I think PSG, there's just way fewer question marks than some of the other top teams. They're fantastic going forward, fantastic defensively. They can press as good as anyone other than probably Barcelona. All the other teams, Barcelona maybe a little more lopsided offensively versus defensively. Liverpool is the same thing, and also Liverpool just have a lot of new players and really have not played a single good game yet from start to finish this season. And then Arsenal, I think, have the fewest question marks, but I don't think Arsenal have the same high end, I guess, that those three other teams do. So PSG, we've seen them be an incredibly dominant team in Europe, and they're going to have the same team this year. So it seemed like an obvious choice for me to put them number one.
Well, joining us to go through Ryan's picks is our Madrid correspondent, Alex Kirkland. Obviously, there's no Real Madrid in his top four, but PSG, Barcelona, Liverpool, and Arsenal. Have you got any complaints with that, Alex, as his top four?
I mean, Madridistas will be fuming. Obviously, I should say, by the way, I'm here at Valdebebas, Real Madrid's training grounds. If there's a bit of background noise and a bit of wobble on my camera as well, the team are training right now, actually, as we speak, out of their first game against Marseille. Look, I mean, obviously the perception here is that Real Madrid are always either favourites or among the favourites for any competition. But I think it's legitimate to say that there are a lot of question marks about this Real Madrid team. There were question marks around the team last season, and there are even more now because there's a lot we don't know about this Real Madrid team and exactly how they're going to look under Xabi Alonso. Barcelona, of course, are a much more consolidated project. This is Hansi Flick's second season. What we saw from Barcelona last season was very, very good, both domestically and in Europe as well. Of course, went all the way to the semi-finals and were unlucky to get knocked out then. So Barcelona being among the top four, I think everyone here would accept that as being fair enough. Real Madrid not being that high up. As you can see behind me, there's a poster on the wall next to me here at Valdebebas with all of Real Madrid's trophies being listed one after the other, among them 15 European Cups. And like I say, in this competition, yeah, Madrid would already expect to be up there. But I think it is fair to have questions about exactly how ready they are to compete against the very best in Europe right now.
And Beth, obviously Liverpool are in that top four. How do you feel Liverpool are set up to try and win the Champions League this season? I think there was a little bit underwhelmed last season with how they kind of finished that campaign. There was obviously quite a lot of excitement around it at one point. Just in terms of Liverpool and probably Arsenal from the Premier League, how do you think that those two are set up to try and challenge in the Champions League this year?
Yeah, well, I think if you probably wouldn't admit it publicly, but I think if you asked Arne Slot privately what his biggest ambition this season was, I think it would be to win the Champions League. I think the manner of the way that Liverpool went out of that competition really rankled with him. And I think PSG were one of the few teams last season that he felt like he maybe couldn't get the better of. I know obviously they beat them 1-0 away from home, but it was such a smash and grab. I was there at the Parc des Princes that night, and it was, Harvey Elliott scores this late goal after a heroic goalkeeping display from Alisson Becker. And, Liverpool didn't deserve anything from that game. PSG were phenomenal that night. And then they got their revenge, obviously, by winning 1-0 at Anfield and then winning on penalties. And I think I think it will be interesting this season because Liverpool last season and everyone last season really didn't know how the league phase really worked. They didn't know sort of what benefit you would get from finishing, top of the league. Liverpool obviously did that, and their reward for that was getting PSG in the round of 16. So, I think this season we will see a lot of teams, Liverpool included, maybe put in less pressure on some of these league phase games. But I think Liverpool are in good shape. I think, as Ryan said, it's still, there's so many unknowns around Liverpool at the moment, despite the fact that they're top of the Premier League, having won all 4 games. There's players still bedding in. We're still yet to see the best of Florian Wirtz. Alexander Isak obviously yet to make his debut. So I think, that there's still a lot of question marks around them. But what I will say is I think one of the things that impressed Arne Slot most about PSG was their pace, their dynamism. And I think with some of the signings that Liverpool have made this season, I think part of that is geared towards trying to win the Champions League. I think for Arsenal, I think they are so solid. I think that's probably the word that maybe describes them best. When you see them in the Premier League week in, week out, you very rarely feel like they're getting battered. You very rarely feel like they're having to really hang on in games. They seem at the back so sort of serene at times. But I do think they maybe lack that slight bit of X factor. And yeah, I suppose it's the PSG thing as well. Before last season, it was being levelled at them constantly. Well, can they go on and win the European Cup because they've not done it before? And it's the same for Arsenal. So I think until Arsenal win it, then I think they'll always be sort of on a rung below the likes of Liverpool, the likes of Barcelona, the likes of Real Madrid. But they do have a great squad, and ultimately I think it just depends on what the draw does, and because I feel like on the day Arsenal can probably beat anyone.
We've just mentioned there that Ryan doesn't have Real Madrid in his top 4. He's got them in 5th. So we've got him on to explain just why he thinks they're an outside bet for this year.
Yeah, Real Madrid in 5th is interesting because I think you could view it as too high or too low at the same time. Last year, they barely scraped by Atletico Madrid, and then they got completely, utterly dominated against Arsenal in the Champions League. And so based on that, painting them as the 5th best team in the world might seem like a little much, but they've added a ton of talent this offseason. Presumably they've upgraded on their coach, or not upgraded on their coach, but their coach maybe better fits the current talent that they have than Carlo Ancelotti did. So I think 5th is kind of just like an uncertainty point to put Real Madrid at, right? Like they could easily be the best team in the world by the time this season ends. They could also easily not be as good as any of these 4 other teams who they were not anywhere near as good as last year. And we just kind of haven't seen Xabi Alonso do it for a full season with them. We haven't really seen them play any good teams yet. So I think 5th for me is kind of like a placeholder with Real Madrid. I almost would be surprised if they ended the season as like the clear 5th best team in the world. I think they'll either be like clearly part of that top 4 or potentially part of like the tier below them.
Alex, Real Madrid, the only team in La Liga with 4 wins from 4. Having watched them at the start of this season, where are they at, do you think, under Xabi Alonso? I mean, are they have they been as impressive as that record suggests?
Well, they're definitely not all the way there yet. It's definitely still very much a work in progress. And Ryan mentioned, it's almost always the same for Madrid. It's about how they do against the best teams, because against almost everyone else, they've always got enough. And that's been the case so far this season. They'll be judged when they're playing against Barcelona or Atletico Madrid in Spain, or the big games in the Champions League. It won't be when they're playing teams like as they have done so far in the league against Real Oviedo or Osasuna or Mallorca or Real Sociedad. There are some really encouraging signs. The big one is Mbappe, who is on another level to what he was last year. Last year, despite the numbers being pretty good with 44 goals in the end in all competitions, he didn't look like the very best version of Kylian Mbappe that we've seen previously. He does now. He's clearly their best player. He's clearly the superstar now in this team. It's not just his goals; it's his all-round play. Against Real Sociedad on Saturday in the league, he was just unstoppable. This is the player that Madrid wanted to get and thought they were getting, and he came in. And like I say, he wasn't bad last year at all, but he wasn't at this level. He looks absolutely confident and comfortable now, so that's a big plus. And the other thing is that Xabi Alonso is giving a kind of structure, a kind of discipline, the way the team plays when they're out of possession that we didn't used to see under Carlo Ancelotti. The team looks a bit more intense. They're winning the ball back higher up the pitch. In defence, the addition of Dean Howson is very, very encouraging. He's really important already to how the team play in terms of his bringing the ball out from the back. There are still some question marks. Vinicius Junior isn't at his best, and there's a feeling that he isn't necessarily a great fit for Xabi Alonso team. There's a bit of tension there, maybe behind the scenes. There isn't a sort of a set first choice on the right hand side either. We've seen Mastantuono play there, Brahim Diaz play there. Rodrigo isn't playing there anymore because he prefers to play on the left. The midfield they opted not to bring in a midfielder. And that was one of the big sort of question marks last year was, did they need a kind of a creative midfielder to sort of do what Toni Kroos and Luka Modric used to do? They decided not to, but there have been improvements there from the likes of Tchouameni, from Arda Güler as well. So it's been encouraging, I would say, so far. But I think it's still too early to say whether they are at that sort of elite level, as Ryan mentions. And that we'll only know that really when these big games come around.
Beth, I mean, obviously everyone will know about Real Madrid's record in this competition. Just from the outside, are they still, do you think, the team to beat when it comes to the Champions League just because they've got that incredible record when it comes to this competition?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it says it all last season that, they in the league phase, they were quite poor, weren't they, really? And I mean, they obviously came to Anfield and I think it was in November and Liverpool were just so much better than them in every area of the pitch and obviously win that game 2-0, I think it was. And then Madrid still go on to go further in the competition than Liverpool did. So I think, Real Madrid, you almost can't judge them on the first half of the season in the Champions League. Sometimes they do struggle and you start to think, could they be sort of the powers in Europe be waning a little bit, and then it gets to the knockout stages and they're able to produce sort of these moments. And I think there are probably three clubs in world football, I'd say probably Madrid, Liverpool and Manchester United, who no matter sort of what state the club is in, they're able to produce these moments that almost sort of defy all logic. And I think, Madrid are the absolute masters of that in this competition. So I think, it depends on the draw. I think Madrid are the best team in Europe? At the moment, no. They could be, as Alex said, there's obviously signs that they're really, really encouraging signs under Xabi Alonso. By the end of the season, they might be right up there. But even if they're not, I still think you can't count them out. I still think they've got to be in that top crop of teams that are going to be vying for the trophy.
Alex, can I just ask one more on Real Madrid? You mentioned there about Mbappe maybe being a different player this season to the one we saw last season. Is there any particular reason why he seems to have hit his stride a bit quicker the start of this year?
I think it's a mixture of factors. I mean, he's more settled, he's more comfortable, he's more confident. Even the very best players still take a little bit of time, don't they, to settle in, to get used to things, to get used to their environment and everything that goes on around the team, as well as literally the kind of the mechanics of being out there on the pitch. So I think it's a bit of that. I think he feels now, like I say, like he's the guy. He's the main man. This is his team. And like I say, he's playing at a level that I think, of course, I wasn't watching him as closely in France as I am now, but I think this is as good as he's ever looked. And physically, there's been a slight adjustment. I think he looks a little bit slimmer, a little bit less bulky, a little bit more lean. So maybe there's sort of a physical component to this as well as a mental component. And like I say, that his teammates have got a better idea of the kind of movements that he's going to be making. And of course, like I say, it's a new team, a new coach. So there might be some structural changes that kind of help him as well. So I think it's a little bit of all of those things. But yeah, like I say, the way he's been playing so far, he looks like certainly the best on forward in Spain, one of the very best in the world. And he's got this kind of hunger, right? And this desire to, of course, it had just happened. They left PSG and what happened? They went and won the Champions League. So I think he feels as well like there's a bit of pressure on him to prove this was, this move that was so long coming was the right one, and that he's come to the place where, he is more likely to win these kinds of trophies than at PSG, even if last season suggested the opposite is the case. So I think there is a bit of a point of proof factor as well. So take all that together as a whole, and like I say, I think he is, if they're going to do something in the Champions League, it will be because of him more than anything else.
Well, outside the top five, Ryan has got Bayern in 6th, Man City in 7th, Chelsea in 8th. So here he is again talking about why he thinks those teams are realistic contenders.
Yeah, so beyond the top 5, I don't have a ton of confidence in any of these 3 teams. Would I be surprised if any of them won the Champions League? I don't think so, including Chelsea, who are, technically the greatest team in the world and will be for the next 4 years as they get to wear the Club World Cup patch. But so in terms of ordering those 3, I think with Bayern, we're at a point where they're basically like what PSG were in the past, where like as dominant as they are in the Bundesliga, it just doesn't matter. Like we have to see them do it in the Champions League, and they've underperformed the Champions League recently. Vincent Kompany kind of plays a style that is very much premised on the fact that his team will have more talent than everyone else, which they don't have in the Champions League. But that being said, I think Bayern probably have more talent right now across the squad than City and Chelsea do. City have been very vulnerable in transition so far this season. They've obviously lost their 2 of their first 3 games, despite just beating Manchester United rather easily in the Manchester Derby. That actually didn't have any effect on how I think they're going to do in the Champions League, shockingly. And then with Chelsea, I think their defensive talent is maybe not what you would want for a team that's going to be kind of part of this top group. And then we also just haven't seen some of their attackers like Joao Pedro and Esteval. They've both been quite good to start the season, but we haven't really seen them play at like a Champions League winning level yet. So despite me having reservations about Bayern's approach being able to like take on all of the top teams, I think right now, if they play it on a neutral field, I would take Bayern over City. And funnily enough, Bayern will be playing Chelsea this week. So we'll kind of get an answer maybe to some of these questions right away.
Rob, obviously Ryan there has sort of put City outside of that top group. And it's quite a unique thing for City this season, because so often they go into the season as favourites, among the favourites for every competition that they're in. Do you feel like that's a fair assessment? Would you say that City are probably just in that rung below the favourite teams this season?
Yeah, I mean, I think having them outside the top 5 is probably fair enough. They're coming off the back of a really disappointing season last year. I think there's still quite a lot of questions about what they're going to be this year after the first couple of games of the season. They've had some good results like against Man United and Wolves. They've had some bad ones against Tottenham and Brighton. So they are a little bit of an unknown quantity. The only thing I would say is that if you're looking at, I mean, it sounds daft talking about City as a dark horse for a competition. But if there is a team that could kind of come out of maybe the rung below and possibly win it, I would have City right up there. Obviously, Pep Guardiola has been there and done it. They've still got one of the best goal scorers in the world in Erling Haaland, who seems to score goals whether the team is playing well or not. It's massive if they can get Rodri back. They've got Donnarumma in goal now, who obviously was part of the PSG team that won it last year. And even last season, right in the middle of the season where City just weren't playing well, they had a lot of injuries, they were getting beaten sort of almost every week. You still had that feeling that if they turned it on in particular games, they could still get quite far in the Champions League. And even, in the end, they went out to Real Madrid. But in that first leg at the Etihad Stadium, they played really, really well for periods. And you did think that, maybe that tie at different points was there for the taking. And if they'd got through that, what could they have gone on to achieve? So it's one of those. I think that if there are other clubs around Europe looking at teams who they don't really want to play, City would certainly be one of those, particularly if they can get into sort of the quarterfinals, semi-finals. I still think City have enough to be considered genuine Champions League winners. But Ryan is probably right. They do appear on paper to be a rung below the likes of PSG, Barcelona, probably even in Liverpool in terms of Premier League rivals. So while it wouldn't be a massive surprise if they went and did quite well in the Champions League, I still think that they're too much of an unknown quantity this year to kind of put your house on them or anything like that.
Yeah, and Alex, obviously, just from an outside perspective, looking in the fixture this week, probably the marquee fixture is Bayern Chelsea. And do you agree with Ryan's assessment of them two teams there? Do you think they will be threatening to, if they came up against Real Madrid, would you be concerned about either of those teams?
Concerned, yes, but I think that's probably more just because, like I say, about the uncertainties we've got about so many aspects of this Real Madrid team right now. I think I'd probably still back Real Madrid to compete, at least compete, and probably to beat either of those teams. I more or less I'd agree with Ryan. I think they're in sort of the second rung of contenders. But yeah, I'd back Madrid against them. In terms of the other Spanish teams, I mean, the other one's interesting to me, of course, being here in Madrid, is Atletico Madrid. They talk about sort of projects that we're not quite sure about. They've brought in, I think it was 7 or 8 players over the summer, rebuilding this squad once again. There's already been a bit of pressure here on Diego Simeone domestically because they didn't get a win in their first 3 league games. They got one at the weekend in a big game against another Champions League side in Villarreal. But again, I just think we don't know quite where Atletico Madrid are right now, and I wouldn't rank them with any of the teams that we discussed so far because, like I say, they've got all these new players, some good players as well, some players that should make them stronger. But what we've seen in recent years is Atletico not being a million miles away, but then coming up short against the best teams. Even if last season, of course, it was a bit of bad luck with that Julian Alvarez slip in the penalty shootout against Real Madrid. So in terms of the Spanish sides, for me, it's Barca out in front, Madrid, and then the others, Athletic and Villarreal, I think, quite some way further down.
Just in terms of maybe teams that we don't talk about as much, Ryan has got Galatasaray down in 20th. Now, I think the Galatasaray, they have got the players, I think, to go quite far if they get, through the league phase. Obviously, is quite tough, but get the right draws in sort of some of the knockout rounds. They've got Victor Osimhen up front. Leroy Sané, obviously, is joined from Bayern Munich. They've got a terrific assistant coach there in Ismael Garcia, who kind of came up with the tactics that destroyed United in the Champions League a couple of years ago. I think they could do quite well if kind of things fall into place for them. Alex, I'll start with you. Is there any team sort of below the ones we talked about that maybe you think has got the possibility to do quite well and maybe surprise some people?
Yeah, again, from a very biased sort of Spain-based perspective, like I say, keep an eye on what the other Spanish sides can do. They lack experience, and you feel like at this level, so often when teams don't have unconsistently making the knockout rounds, it's difficult for them to make that leap, isn't it? But I'm going to be the fact that Spain have got 5 teams in the competition this season, of course, is a big boost for the league, and I'm intrigued about what a team like Athletic Club can do, playing a fantastic stadium in San Mamés with a really good atmosphere, and they've got some good players, and they've got a very good coach in Ernesto Valverde, even if he's sometimes accused of being a little bit conservative. And Villarreal are the other ones who've got a really good coach in Marcelino, and they've worked really well in the transfer market as well. And so far in their league, they look pretty good. So I'm intrigued as to how both of those are going to do, even if, like I say, I don't think they've got what it takes to get to the latter stages.
And Beth, just in terms of the Premier League participants, you've got Newcastle and Spurs. Are you expecting either of them to be relatively successful in this competition? Is it one of those teams who you fancy over the other, possibly to do quite well?
I mean, I think the one thing you will say with Spurs is, they've managed to get over the line in a European competition now, which again was something that was always levelled at them. So whether that gives them an extra dimension, I'm not too sure. And I think Spurs are the kind of team that on their day, they've got some really top players. They've looked really good at times this season, but then they obviously had that defeat to Bournemouth a couple of weeks ago. So I just think they've maybe not got you can't rely on them, can you, really, to be consistent throughout? And I just sort of think, up against in the knockout stages, if they were to come up against a PSG or a Real Madrid, I would struggle to see them getting past them. Newcastle, again, they're sort of a little bit of an unknown quantity at the minute. They've obviously brought in Nick Voltemade, who scored his first goal against Wolves at the weekend. And, I think we now will start to see a different Newcastle. Now they've got a striker, a designated striker, obviously a bit of a blow with Johan Visa being out as well. But yeah, I don't see either of those teams sort of going deep into the competition, but I think they've both got a chance to make it through to the knockouts.
Well, you can read Ryan's full list of the 36 teams in the Champions League this season on ESPN.com. That's all we've got time for this week. So thanks to Alex and to Beth, and also thanks for listening to the Football Reporters. We'll see you again next week.